I'm Phong. I'm assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, and today I will be presenting my papers. The title is GFWeb, Measuring the Great Firewall Web Censorship at Scale. This is a joint work with my collaborators at the Citizen Lab at the U of T, CMU, SRI, Stony Brook, and the University of Chicago. So before starting, I'm sure a lot of you here is familiar, but what is internet censorship and how does it look like? So once in a while, we may have experienced something like this when we go to a country that have internet censorship. We try to access a website. What we get back is not that website, but a blog page. Say, hey, what you're trying to access is being blocked. Give you some explanations. But sometimes we would see something like this, very, very generic arrow, very technical terms on there. Most people would not even understand what's going on, and we think the internet, malfunctioning. So why there's two kind of, censorship like that? Because sometimes government can explain why they block sites like pornography, gambling, but oftentimes they cannot find a good explanation why they block news, why they block social media, why they block political websites. Okay? So that is when they use covert censorship. And when it comes to covert censorship, the Great Firewall of China is known to be one of the most complicated firewall on the internet. It actually has been developed for more than 30 years. If you look at that article, it's actually from 1997, almost 30 years until today. And even until today, the Great Firewall sometimes still make the headlines of many newspapers because it keeps being developed because it needs to catch up with the scale of the internet. Every single second I'm speaking here, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more websites appear on the internet. So it needs to be updated and upgraded to catch up with the scale of the web. So there are several filtering techniques used by the Great Firewall, including DNS tampering, keyword filtering, and it used to look for unencrypted traffic, and SNI-based blocking basically look for those TOS handshake to look for the domain name, and active probing to look for VPN, Tor relays to block them, and IP-based blocking, which is null routing to a bunch of subnet. Among those techniques, this work, we focus on the 3 types of filtering: DNS, HTTP, and HTTPS, because these are the foundational protocols that run the web. So every time you type something into your browser, it will involve at least 1, 2, or even all of the 3 protocols here. So how can we detect internet censorship? Given a censor, a very repressive censor like China and the Great Firewall, how can we, as researchers outside of the country, can know if a website is being blocked? So traditionally, we would ask a friend or a volunteer, like, hey, can you test xyz.com to see if it's accessible? And then they will tell you, oh, it's accessible or blocked. But as computer scientists, we tend to ask really general and bigger questions like, how many websites are being blocked, right? Given nowadays there are more than 400 million domains being registered on the web, we just can't ask the person to test more than 300 million domains for us because we're gonna put them at risk. So that's why this traditional method, based on volunteer, it doesn't really scale when we ask that kind of questions. So now get back to the research goal of what we're doing here is how can we measure the Great Firewall at scale and frequently, right? So we have built 2 systems, one called GFWatch, which we presented in USENIX 2021. And for these presentations, the new system called GFWeb is built to measure HTTP and HTTPS blocking of domain names. So what do we know, about web blocking behavior of the Great Firewall? Based on years of research of our entire community here, there are 2 primary domain-based filtering techniques. The first one is based on DNS, and the other one is based on the host name field of the HTTP and the HTTPS packet. So what we are seeing here is how the Great Firewall, there's packet injection when it detects a client trying to access or censor domain name. In this case, this is a humanrightswatch.org, right? So one of the very unique characteristics of the Great Firewall is bidirectional censorship. In other words, regardless of the direction of the packet, someone inside the country try to send this packet to an IP outside the country, it would trigger the middle box. But if you outside the country, you send the same packet into the country, you also trigger the Great Firewall middle box. So let's bring back the figure of HTTP and HTTPS blocking because that is the focus of this work, right? So up on detecting a censor domain in the HTTP GET packet or the SNI field of the client hello, what it will do is it will send 3 reset packets. So in computer networking, it's meant that tear down, like disrupting this connection. In other words, what it means is there is some sort of backup there. Why, they could just have sent 1, but they sent 3, right? Most importantly, what we see from this injections behavior is that there's some loss tolerant. What does it mean? So in the absence of the SYN add packet and the add packet, if you just send a SYN packet and a push add packet followed by that SYN packet, if that push add packet contains a censor domain, the Great Firewall will also be triggered. The middle box will inject the packet regardless of the incomplete natures of the 3-way handshake. But isn't that weird? Because it seems to be like it's a stateful firewall, but it still be triggered even though the 3-way handshake was not complete. And I was asking myself, is this a bug? But apparently, it's not. The reason why is that between the 2 computers on the internet, when a packet go from one to the other one, it may take that path, but on the way to come back, it may take a totally different path, right? And because of this asymmetric routing on the internet, the middle box have to design in the way that it doesn't have to see all of the packet because there are times that it will not see all of the 3 packets for the 3-way handshake. And for that reason, we say the Great Firewall have this loss-tolerant design in it. So based on that knowledge that we found for that design, what we do is we design a system called GFWeb to test almost like a billion domains over the span of 20 months. How we do it? First, we gather a bunch of domains that we could on the internet, ranging from the zone files, the triangle list, the common ground list, and the citizen lab test list. So every month right now, we test roughly around 6 million domains. We put that into a machine that we control in the US, and then from that machine, we just flood packet to an IP address that we control in China. And then that machine, we just set up so that it doesn't respond to anything, right? And what happened is, for any pairs of SYN push add packet that we send, if it contains a censor domain, then we will get the reset packet. If it doesn't contain a censor domain, we get nothing. That's how we can tell that if a domain is censored, right? And then because we know that the Great Firewall use some sort of regular expressions for blocking, right? They block Facebook.com, but they also block image.facebook.com, www.facebook.com. So not to overcounting that, we have to figure out what is the regular expression that they use. So when we find their fully qualified domain that being censored, then we chop them and then make all of the possible combinations of that domain. And then we probe them again, and finally we could find something we call base censor domain, which is the shortest string. So the idea is we want to find what is the shortest string that can trigger the Great Firewall. The method is, well, when we think how many ways that we can chop a string and make it different domain names and subdomain name, there are actually 8 different ways. And based on that, we can have a more precise count of how many domains are being blocked by the Great Firewall. So this slide just gives you a sense of how we chop those strings and put different random string and the dot and without the dot. So basically, there's 8 different ways to do that. So in 2021, what we found was they have very terrible regular expression. They want to block Tor. What they do is they have a regular expression called asterisk torproject.org. If you're familiar with that, which means anything end with torproject.org get blocked. You know what? Ventilator.project.org, mentorproject.org got blocked back in 2021. What we found is after 1 year of that publication, they fixed it. They fixed it. So don't blame me. I'm not trying to improve the Great Firewall here, but they actually fixed it. So now their blocking rules is more correct with the dot in front of Tor project. So what we found at the end of the day was they have 3 different block lists for DNS, HTTP, and HTTPS. And what you're seeing here is the HTTPS list is the smallest one. And just based on this slide, what we can say is they're very straightforward circumvention for a lot of domain. If you can get the correct IP address, don't type HTTP, but type HTTPS, then you circumvent the Great Firewall. Nothing else that you have to do. But I think maybe after this presentation, that may change. Like the bottom line of HTTPS may move up closer. So let's see. Another thing that we noticed during the course of this study was in April 2023, the China Cyberspace Administration, they released a draft on regulating AI services. And immediately after that, we see almost like a linear increase of how many sites that related to AI, ChatGPT get blocked, Hugging Face, OpenAI chat, Deep AI, all of those domains get blocked. And shortly after that, domestic market see a bunch of introductions of tools by the local providers. So they tell you that by continuously measuring the Great Firewall, we can tell what is happening in Beijing by the policymakers. So with that, in this talk, I didn't cover everything that we have in the paper, but technically, with GFWeb, we discovered that there's different block lists. They're not identical. They overlap, but not identical. For DNS, HTTP, and HTTPS blocking, they actually fix things that we as a research community, like sometimes we say, oh, we do at academic research, they don't care, but apparently they do care. There's other thing that asymmetric filtering that I didn't have time to go through, but it's in the paper. And there's also implications of this work on if we're gonna measure the Great Firewall or any other firewall, we should measure it across multiple layers, because otherwise, if we measure only one layer, the chance that we only see just one aspect of it is very high. With that, I conclude my talk, and thank you for listening, and feel free to ask questions.